In this video, we're going to be looking at the methods of multiplication, which is part of the 4 operations. So let's see what types of methods of multiplication we can use. We will go over short multiplication and long multiplication. Now, don't be fooled by their names. They're actually the same method. Short multiplication is only for smaller numbers, whereas long multiplication is for larger ones. But essentially, they're just the same method, so you don't have to worry about memorizing 2 different methods. Short multiplication is for any numbers that are 2 digits multiplied by 1-digit numbers, whereas long multiplication will be for 2-digit numbers multiplied by any numbers that are 2 digits and above. Now, before we get started, you need to note that short multiplication is what we're going to see starting on first, and this is for Year 3 students. However, also note that long multiplication is for Year 5 students because it's much more difficult and hard to grasp. So if you're anywhere below Year 5, I'll tell you when to stop watching so you don't waste your time. So let's get started with short multiplication. This is how we set out our short multiplication in this format. You can recognize it from our subtraction and addition methods. Our numbers that we use in the sum go in the yellow box, whereas our answer will appear in the blue box. So let's have a look at this question first. 59 multiplied by 3. What we always do first of all is we always just input our numbers into the yellow box. And what we're going to do first is we always look at the very right, at the ones column. This is what we always do for addition, subtraction, and it's what we're going to do here. So, since we're looking at this column first, we can see that there's 9 and 3. And we're going to do 9 multiplied by 3, or 3 multiplied by 9, which we know is to be 27. However, since we also know that 27 is made up of 2 10s and 7 1s, it can't fit in this box here, which is only for 1 digit. So we're going to keep the 1s and we're going to transfer the 2 10s into the next column, the 10s column now. So now we're going to be moving on to the next column above, the one more left. This is the 10s column, where the 5 is. We're going to be doing 5 multiplied by still 3. This is because in multiplication in general, short multiplication and long multiplication, the digits that we have are the bottom number we kind of use as an anchor. When I say anchor, I mean that we go from the first number and then we go to the second number and we multiply by both of them. So now at the 10s column, we know that it's time to multiply our 5 10s by our singular 3. We know that 5 multiplied by 3 is 15, but again, there's 1 10 and 5 1s, which will not fit in our box that's only for 1 digit. So we'll keep the 5 and transfer the 1 10 along across the bottom. Now remember that we also transferred a little 2 to our 10s column as well, so we need to add 5, add 2, which will be 7. And then, since we have also transferred this 1 10 to the hundreds column, but there's nothing else for us to do here since we've already multiplied by 9, 3 by 9, and 5 by 3, we just have to bring it up to the hundreds column. And this will give us our final answer, which is 177. So, now that we've done short multiplication, let's have a look at long multiplication. This is the same method that we did for short multiplication, but we repeat some of the steps that we did for the extra digits. So remember when I said we do 2 digits multiplied by 2 digits or 3 digits or 4 digits, we need to repeat some of the steps that we just did for those extra digits. This method is also the one that's beginning to be taught at Year 5, so if you're not yet in Year 5 then there's no need to watch on and you can leave the video. Now that we've got our Year 5s here, and above of course, Let's have a look at this method. Now, as you can see, you can definitely recognize this method. It's what we use in a short multiplication. But it's not the end, because we also, here's our question that we're going to be working on. We'll have our numbers that we normally input in. We'll also have some space for working out, which is not what we had in the last time. We have some space for working out below the first line, and then we will have another line, which then becomes our answer at the very bottom. So you can see that it's like short multiplication format, but we're adding another line because we're going to be doing some working out here. So, like always, let's input our digits into the first yellow box. And remember, we always start from the very right, so the ones column. Now remember that I talked about using the digits as anchors, the bottom digits as anchors. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to be doing 2 multiplied by 8, multiplied by 9, multiplied by 5. And then, when we're finished with that, we're going to move on to the tens column. This is where our 3 is. And we're going to use this 3 as an anchor as well. Multiply by 8, multiply by 5, 9, and multiply by 5. This is because basically we're using a sort of partitioning method. As you can see in the first instance, let's get back to it. In our first instance, we're doing 2 multiplied by 8, and then multiplied by 9, which is actually 90, then 2 multiplied by 5, which is actually 500. And in our other part of multiplying, where we look at the tens column, we're going to be multiplying 30, because remember, this is actually 32 that we're multiplying. So it's a 2 and 30 that it's made up of. So we're going to be multiplying 30 by 8, then 90, then 500. So just so you're aware of how this method actually works, we're just partitioning really. So let's start with our 2. We're going to be using it as an anchor. First of all, we're always going to go up to the 8. First of all, we know 8 multiplied by 2 is 16. I'm not going to be showing how we transfer digits and so on, because you should know that by now. So we get 16. Then let's move to our next digit, which is 2 multiplied by 9, which we know to be 18. We have carried on over a 1 here, so we're going to change that 8 into a 9. Then it will be 2 multiplied by 5, which we know to be 10. We've also transferred a 1 here, so this will become a 1, and that will just disappear. And this last 10 that we transferred over is just going to become the 1 here. So now that we've done it by the 2, we now have to do it by the 30. As you can see, this is what we got by multiplying 2 by 8, then 90, then 500, because that's what makes up 598. And this is the answer that we get for that. But now we need to get the answer for 30 times 8, then 90, then 500 to get 598 times 30. And we're going to be writing our answer here. So basically what we've done is we've multiplied 30 multiplied by 598. We're going to be adding on 2 multiplied by 598, and that will get us our overall answer, which is basically partitioning our numbers. So this is where our 30 will go. And we're going to be anchoring to each of these digits. But before we continue, there's one thing that we need to account for. We need to add a 0 into the ones column. Let me show you why. Because now we've moved on to doing 30 multiplied by 598. Well, 30 is actually 3 tens. We know tens has 1 0 on the end, it's not just ones. So we need to account for these tens and add a 0. It's basically place value. We're multiplying by these tens now, and to account for doing tens, we need to move it up to the next place value so that it all still coincides and makes sense. So before we go on, let me just explain even further for this. we're just doing the tens now, the ones and the tens, but if you had hundreds, then we would be doing 100 multiplied by 598, as remember we're partitioning. We know that 100 has 2 zeros, so we need to add 2 zeros in the ones and the tens column on our third line. And it would just increase as we go into bigger numbers. So if we went to thousands, we know that thousands have 3 zeros, so we would have to add 3 zeros at the ones, tens and hundreds to account for multiplying by 1,000. So now that we have counted for multiplying by tens, we can now start our anchoring process again. Let's do 3 multiplied by 8, which is actually 30, but since we've already accounted for it, the 30, the tens, then we don't have to call it 30 anymore, we can just call it 3. So let's do 3 multiplied by 8, which is 24, 3 multiplied by 9, which is 27, we need to add on the 2, and then 3 multiplied by 5, which is 15, add on the 2 to get 17. And then just move up that little one. And then here we get our overall answer, putting 30 multiplied by 598. And so now we need to add these two. If you can't remember what I said before, this is partitioning method. We've done 2 multiplied by 598 and 30 multiplied by 598. So now we need to add these two so that we can add these partitioned numbers together. So we're only working out these numbers in the green box, remember. We're not adding any of the numbers up here. Since we've already completed our first part, we need to be now adding only our second part of numbers. So in between these two lines. So let's start the process. 6 add 0 is just 6. 9 add 4 is 13. 1 add 9 is 10. We need to account for the 1 that was transferred over, so that becomes 1. 1 plus 7 is 8. We need to account for the transferred 1, so it becomes 9. And then 1 add nothing is just 1. And so it's in the blue box. This is our final answer, which is 19,136. And if you get out your calculators, you can do it yourselves. You can see that it's actually right. It does work. So, just to go back on what I said about this method, probably the most confusing part, it was for me, is that any of this bottom number, if it's the tens, if it has tens, then we're going to add 1 0 to the second line before calculating. If it has any hundreds, we're going to add 2 zeros to the third line before calculating. If it has thousands, we're going to add 3 zeros to the fourth line before calculating, and so on and so forth. So, I'm just going to show you the method that I wrote out so we can look back at what we learnt. Our first step was to always arrange the numbers into the format shown in the video. So put the numbers into the yellow box, which we always do. Then from the very right, we always start from the very right, the ones column, we multiply the bottom number by each digit above. Remember, we're using anchoring as we're partitioning the numbers basically. And then after we've multiplied all that, we're going to move on to the next column to the left a bit, which is the tens column. And before we do any calculating, we're going to remember that we need to add a 0 to the very right, to the ones column of our second line to account for it being a 10. And then we'll just calculate it like normal by each digit above. And then we're going to keep on repeating these two steps until we've multiplied all of the bottom number. So if the bottom number had 1,000 in it, for example, then we would keep on doing the steps 3 and 4 until we have accounted for all of the place values. And then we would add all our numbers created, so those that were in the green box, to receive our final answer. at the very bottom. Remember that we're adding, we're not multiplying. We've multiplied in the first step, and now we need to add because they are partitioned numbers and we need to add them back together. Thank you very much, and if you have any concerns, then you can look back in the video, you can look back at the method, you can leave a comment, and I'm sure to get back to you.